The Atheist Debates Patreon project presents the stupidest argument against atheism ever. Yes, it may be. And first of all, I'm already going to say that this video, I probably expect this to get demonetized as it's a sensitive subject. I'm probably going to speak in code on occasion. And it's embarrassingly stupid that I have to spend any time at all addressing this particular argument. And I suppose, to be fair, I didn't have to. But it's worth showing you just how absolutely ridiculous and immoral some people are on behalf of their religion. Here's the post. I left the name there. I don't care. It says, here's a new syllogism refuting atheism. 1, bestiality is wrong. 2, the atheistic worldview cannot establish why bestiality is wrong. Therefore, the atheist worldview cannot be true. The only way the conclusion, 3, can be false is if you disagree that bestiality is wrong, 1, or if you believe that it can be established that it's objectively immoral for sex between 2 different species under the presuppositions of your godless belief system. Are there any courageous atheists who want to attempt refuting either premise? Me, you idiot. Your argument is invalid in structure, unsound, and absolutely one of the dumbest things I've ever read. It concludes by saying, because this is what you must be able to do in order to support the viability of your own worldview. No, it's not. You are monumentally confused about absolutely every aspect of this. In 20 years, this is probably the stupidest argument I've ever heard against atheism. So first of all, atheism is the position of not being convinced that a God exists, or in some cases of being convinced that gods don't exist. It isn't a worldview. It does not include moral decisions or moral conclusions. My morality is rooted in things like secular humanism and principles, not in whether or not there's a God. Not in whether or not I think there's a God. The atheistic worldview, he's claiming that bestiality is wrong. The atheist worldview can't establish why. Therefore, the atheistic worldview can't be true. That argument is invalid in structure. The premises don't connect. Being as charitable as possible, I would reword this perhaps as a worldview that includes moral precepts that cannot account for the immorality of bestiality is not true. Atheism is a worldview that includes moral precepts that cannot account for the immorality of bestiality. Therefore, atheism isn't true. That would be at least a syllogism that's valid in structure, although it's still unsound. Because first of all, we haven't established that bestiality is immoral. We haven't established that atheism, we have established, in fact, is not a worldview that includes moral precepts. So you cannot take something that does not make a moral pronouncement on something and say that it can't be true. It might be the case that there is no God and that it is still, in fact, immoral. Atheism doesn't have to give an accounting for morality. Essentially, this is the only way to say bestiality is wrong is to appeal to my proposed moral source, but that's also not true. I remember in the debate that I did years ago with Cy Ten Briggencate, he presented basically one lone argument, and that is, it is reasonable to believe that which is true. It's true that God exists. Therefore, it's reasonable to believe that God is true. And he rightly assumed that I would be addressing his second premise. But the first premise is also false, as somebody pointed out during the QA, and I've mentioned several times. It's reasonable to believe something is true is not the case, because something could be true, and yet you might not have good reason to believe it. It might be true that I have, a $5,000 or $10,000 sitting on my desk, but you don't have any good reason to believe that. I wish I had a good reason to believe that. I don't have a good reason to believe that. The mere fact that something is true is not what makes it reasonable. What makes it reasonable is the case for accepting that it's true. So I was wrong there. This person's doing kind of the same thing. They're saying bestiality is wrong because they want to smuggle in feelings about things and circumvent an actual logical argument. So when they say, are there any courageous atheists who want to attempt refuting either premise? First of all, I'll refute the structure of your argument. Your argument is not a valid argument. This is not up for debate or anything else. Your argument's structure is invalid. You have presented an incredibly stupid structure. That said, premise number 1, bestiality is wrong or bestiality is immoral. What ends up happening is when you smuggle in something like this, you rely on manipulating people's feelings in order to try to avoid the problems with your own argument. This is the same thing that happened when Daniel, in one of our debates, tried to make a big deal about the fact that I said I wouldn't make sex between 9-year-olds, for example, illegal. What I'm willing to make a law about is more about what I think the effectiveness of a law should be and what punishment there should be. That it was not in any way me saying that sex between 9-year-olds should be considered moral or legal just because I was saying that I wouldn't make a law about it. Now, what's going to happen now is they're going to say, oh, you wouldn't make it illegal to have sex with sheep. Well, actually, yes. We're talking about that very thing right now. But whether or not you want to make something illegal is independent of whether or not something is immoral. The law isn't merely based on immorality. There are things that we consider to be immoral that we make illegal, and there are things that we make illegal whether or not they're immoral. And there are things that we consider to be immoral that we don't make illegal, or we shouldn't, perhaps. Maybe somebody's going to start making more laws about whether or not infidelity is illegal. I know it's still on the books in some cases, but largely we've done away with laws about infidelity being illegal. So what's been asked here is for someone to justify, actually they wanted an atheist to refute either premise. Premise one, bestiality is wrong. I think it's wrong too. But it's not, I don't think it's wrong because of any atheistic position. There's nothing about atheism that says that it's wrong. That's not where my morals come from. That's not what it's based on. And that's not what atheism is. My reasoning is based on something that you overlooked. And also when you go back to the Daniel Hakikachu, Michael Jones debate over child marriage, something that they both overlooked and neither mentioned. Consent. Consent is the cornerstone of everything having to do with interpersonal relationships, having to do with interactions with other thinking beings. Do you have informed, enthusiastic consent? Uncoerced consent? When you ask me, why do I think bestiality is wrong? It's because there is not a way that I can tell that you could get informed, enthusiastic, non-coerced consent from non-human animals. That's it. You can tap dance around, you can say all the other things. But what if I could get consent? Okay, keep playing your fantasy land. Consent is the key. That's why I think it's wrong. But if you only think it's wrong because you think your God is opposed to it, then you're not providing any justification for anyone. You're just making an assertion that you seem to know how your God feels about it and that any of us should care how your God feels about it. The God of the Bible, for example, whether real or not, got a lot of things wrong, like slavery, like gender equality, like advocating for the slaughter of another community while keeping their virgin girls as a prize. Not only do I think that bestiality is wrong, primarily on the foundation of consent and bodily autonomy, I actually have a preferred penalty. I think that it should probably be a misdemeanor type classification where you are sent for clinical psychiatric evaluation treatment in addition to perhaps a fine. There you go. I don't know if it's the right solution or not. I haven't spent a whole lot of time about this, to be honest. Outside of somebody posting a meme like this, it's not something that I spend a lot of time thinking about until somebody decides to make a law about it. And then I'm like, okay, what's the justification for this? Because I'm okay with it. I'm okay with it being illegal. I'm okay with it being viewed as immoral. So I've told you that your argument is invalid in structure. It is. It is. That is invalid in structure. Then you wanted refutations of either premise. It's pointless to try to refute a premise when the argument is invalid in structure. But I did make my case for how, as an atheist, I can rely on principles of secular humanism for bodily autonomy and consent to say that bestiality is, in fact, immoral, and that I'm okay with it being illegal, and that I have at least some idealized penalty and classification of that as a misdemeanor. But the God of the Bible, whether it is real or not, got a lot of things wrong. Exodus 22:19 says that whoever lies with a beast shall surely be put to death. So, Drago, are you advocating for the death penalty for bestiality? Are you so desperate? Because you can't provide evidence for your God. You can't provide sufficient evidence for any of the things that you say about your supernatural beliefs, about your God, about your holy book. You can't demonstrate that the doctrinal things are true. And so your only thing that you can do is to try to attack atheism, and you're doing it in one of the stupidest ways I've ever seen. So if you're going to be consistent, if the Bible's penalty in Exodus 22 is death, then you should be advocating for people to be put to death whenever they're convicted of this. By the way, that's the penalty in Exodus. There's a different penalty in Leviticus. Leviticus chapter 20, verses 15 and 16 is really weird. Because if a man has sex with an animal, you're to put the man to death and you put the animal to death. Oh, by the way, it also says if a woman does this, you're to put the woman to death and the animal to death. Now, what's weirder? That we're going to also kill the animal who's seemingly an innocent victim in all this, or that we had to specifically include language that the same penalty applies if a woman does this. This is right down to absolute the insanity of the Bible. Holding men and women to completely different standards, different value. I've already done a video, you can go find it on my channel, about the Bible's take on women. But it's weird that we had to include, the penalty's the same. You have to kill the person. You could have just said kill the person, but nope, we had to kill the man, and we had to kill the woman, and we had to kill the animal. It's wild. Texas added a law about bestiality in 2017, which made it a felony. It was illegal prior to 2017, but only as like a misdemeanor or a public lewdness thing. In 21 states, it's a misdemeanor. In 21 states, it's a felony. In 6 states, it could be a felony or a misdemeanor, either one, depending on certain things. And it's legal in West Virginia and New Mexico. So instead of coming at atheists suggesting atheism can't give an account for why bestiality is wrong, rah, 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 maybe you should be going to West Virginia and New Mexico and asking them why they haven't outlawed it. And you should be going to all those other states and asking why they're not seeking the death penalty in these cases. So for the author of this invalid, unsound syllogism, I've given my justification, the principle of consent and bodily autonomy, to a moral objection to bestiality, as well as my proposed penalty. Here's my question for you in return. Do you not care about the principles of consent and bodily autonomy? Is that not something that your religion advocates or values? Do you not care about helping reduce the incident rate of violations of consent and bodily autonomy? Because if your only reason for opposing it is the Bible says so, well, the Bible also says you should kill the person and the animal. Are you going to be lobbying for those penalties? And if so, why are you and your holy book so desperate to kill the victims of sexual violation? You don't have the high ground here. You don't have the high ground here morally. You don't have the high ground here intellectually. You don't have any ground at all. Go back to the drawing board, stop looking for gotchas, and try to find some actual evidence for what you believe. Maybe if you're lucky, it won't be as embarrassing as this. See you next time.